I guess around 99-ish, came to start tying the knot. And it was basically like two woolly buggers together. A few people have started tying them back then, and the request from some of them was to make it simpler to produce in mass. So it kind of became shrunken down versions of what it is now. So it's basically just a couple material fly, even though it was two separate hooks. It was, at the time, it was more of like, how can we make this cost effective for companies to produce? And they kept saying less, less, less. So I kept modifying it, cutting off stuff of my new one. And of course now, in modern days, it's a little different than it was in 1998, when asking a fly tying company to produce double their production cost in one fly was like, oh, that is just, we will not touch that with a 10-foot pole, because it's $1.98 for a woolly bugger and $1.98 for a woolly bugger, and oh my gosh, no one's ever going to pay $6 for a fly. That was the thinking back then, and it took a little bit of coaxing to get the first few of the OGs to be produced without me having to be the only guy tying them, or a handful of my buddies that were in the streamer game at the time. And so it's still the same, still the same pattern today. It just, the materials change and you can do a lot with it. And it kind of, spawned on some other flies as well. It kind of morphed the OG into like a supernatural, and the supernatural is like a little bit more modern material, has some brush in it, and we didn't have that back then. Like, trying to like tell these kids that are tying now that, oh yeah, by the way, there was no internet either, just so you know. People fished without the internet. Many advancements went on long before the interwebs. We actually saw that all develop, and we're like, oh man, now information's like coming at you like a speed of light. But it went from like two material fly, some rubber, and we didn't even have good hooks, by the way. I'll throw that in there. We didn't have nice short shank hooks with good gap on them. We had streamer hooks, and the whole reason for it to begin with, the OG was to get rid of the two long shank hooks. If you had two medium shank hooks, at least your fish would stay on for an extra 2 seconds to get a net under them, versus like the Carrie Stevens lever arm, that you kind of lose the brown trout quite often with. So that's kind of, once it morphed into the supernatural, where you add the brush and get the lead eyes on there, and realize that anything you can wrap on a hook, you can make a circus peanut with, which is kind of cool. A lot of guys are playing around making their own brushes now and things like that, and you could use bass legs and every kind of color known to man. You still have the foundation colors, that are out right now. I mean, I still use the same exact colors, the same exact process, the same exact deal to make these flies that I did, 15 years ago in a nutshell, 20 years ago.
Do you remember fishing? What was it like fishing
Oh my gosh, it was like revolutionary, because two hooks and basically two collared woolly buggers, tied together, and it was really something. And you had the jig fly, and you had the rubber legs on there, and you had something that was like more of a bass type fly, but you take it onto the trout river, and it was like they'd never seen it. And I remember vividly, it was like spring, and the water was up. It was that nice spring stain, and it just came up, and the fish were red hot on it. And actually had to pull over and buy a little disposable camera, people. A disposable camera. I know they're making a resurgence now, but that's very retro. I mean, this was like the little plastic thing so the water wouldn't, like, you know, you could get it waterproof, and you didn't know at the end of it whether there were like 2 ants on a hill holding a fish. You know, yeah, that stuff. You know, that, like, you know, actual phones in a house, you know, back then in that era. Yeah, it was really, you know, something else. And, you know, compared to what we have now. And I do remember fishing it for the first time and how effective it was, and how you had more of that bass feel to it. You know, the bass guys still had those, you know, jigging craws and jigging pigs and all that stuff. And I was like, well, we got to do that. And we got to do something like that. And it was basically like, how can you make it as easy to produce as possible? Because you're living in Baldwin in a trailer, and you need the olive one for the guy who threw in a tree the night before, you know? So that's how that kind of came, and now it's kind of exploded, and some of the flies that are out now that I have, you know, available for people to use. From the OG to the Supernatural, we got to add some bulk to it. We beefed up the heads of it. We got to put some brushes on the front, put a nice marabou collar on it, got a nice little bit more profile to it. A lot of times you want that, and it's very similar to like what I've been tying recently. I mean, it's really funny. I mean, even though these patterns, like for me, it's like my fly, so I've had this thing forever. You know, you come up with a handful of cool colors and things that you think might help out people in general fishing. You know, try to mix as many colors as I like to try to match bottoms in various areas, and that's kind of what I always do and always have done. And we got to put some modern materials in there. We didn't have polar chenille. You know, we didn't have it. It didn't exist. It was like Estaz. That was like big time stuff. Oh, Estaz. That's, you know, that was like a miracle blend back then. We were making eggs with it and all sorts of stuff. And tying, you know, basic single streamers with it, and, you know, so that's what we use. That's what I had. So once the, you know, modern developments, every time something new comes out, you say, okay, well, I can utilize this material in which way. And that's why the Circus peanut will always evolve. It'll continue to go on because there's so many things you can do with it. Some of the new things that we did with the Supernatural is we did use the polar chenille, which we didn't have back then. We had a lot cooler rubber legs now, I'll say that. So we had some nice matching legs. We had a couple of double collar on these with marabou and some schlappen, which gives it a nice little variation at the front. And of course the brush. The brush is big. Brushes have been big. And it actually adds a lot of balance to the front of that fly. It moves a little bit more water. So if you're looking to get down or have more of a jig, your original is going to be a little better. This is going to be a little bit more in that mid column because it kind of takes away some of that sink rate, I'd call it. But still balanced enough that you can launch them a million miles.